Welcome to Disability Justice and Workplace Health and Safety. This webinar was run by Yassine Khan at the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley and was hosted by the UC Berkeley Labor Center. On the slide right now is a title slide that reads the title I just read and has a couple concentric circles in light blue on a dark blue background. In a moment, we're going to get started with the recording from the webinar, but I wanted to go over the slides that didn't get recorded because we waited until everyone knew that recordings were going to happen. So the slide I'm showing now has the title Welcome plus Webinar Norms. On the far right corner are 3 different logos from folks affiliated or associated with this event. There's the UC Berkeley Labor Center logo, the LOHP or Labor Occupational Health Program logo, and the DCC or Disability Cultural Community Center logo. So here's what the slide says. Welcome to Workplace Safety for All, hosted by the UC Berkeley Labor Center and facilitated by the Labor Occupational Health Program, co-sponsored by the Disability Cultural Community Center. To ensure an accessible learning environment for all, please minimize chat use during the presentation, chat directly to Sierra or use the Q&A. Slide link and captions link can be found in Q&A, and slides and a video recording will be shared post-event. Videos will be edited out of the recording.
The slide we have now has the title Land Acknowledgement, and I'm going to be reading this. Many of us, all of us actually, are coming in virtually, but both the UC Berkeley Labor Center and the Labor Occupational Health Program, as parts of the UC Berkeley campus, recognize that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, or sit right now, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. This acknowledgement that I just read was co-created with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and Native American student development here on campus, and it is a living document, so you may have heard slightly different versions at different events. Yassine, if you go to the next slide for me. All right, so we are now on a slide with the caption or the title Agenda. For this, I'm going to be kind of walking through what we'll do today. So we're going to start with introducing Yassine, and that'll be the end of you hearing my voice for quite a while. And then Yassine's going to get into some of our content for today. How is work related to health? Why do workplace injuries and illnesses happen? There'll be some videos and scenarios. Identifying workplace hazards, also with scenarios. And then we're going to go over some workplace safety wins, particularly those that are relevant to the disability community, and what that's looked like. And then Yassine, last slide for me, the next one. Stunning, thank you so much. So now we're looking at a slide that has the title of Introducing Yassine. There is a photo of Yassine, and in this photo, Yassine is smiling, has some beautiful green and pink greenery behind her. She has short curly hair. It's a bit longer in her video today, and is wearing a pink shirt. Yassine Khan is a program coordinator with the Labor Occupational Health Program who received her BA from the University of Connecticut and earned an MPH with a concentration in environmental and occupational health and safety from Drexel University. Yassine currently works on projects focusing on young workers, school employees, and workers in other industries in California. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Yassine.
Thank you so much, Sierra. Hi, everyone. It is so nice to be here. As Sierra mentioned, this webinar is intended to be interactive. So as we go through, please feel free to participate. You can unmute yourself. You can chat in answers. But I find in kind of any presentation, it's always going to be a lot more interesting if we're learning kind of from each other as we go through. So thank you again so much for having me. to start out, I would love to ask the group who here has ever had a really bad job. So this will be the first time of a few where folks can either unmute themselves. Sarah.
I definitely used the reaction feature to raise my hand just now. I have absolutely had rough jobs. I've had jobs where I haven't felt safe. So if you are also feeling like, oh, I have not had a great job, you should be able to raise your hand. I also just double checked, and folks should be able to unmute themselves as well. I see some folks raising their hands in the attendee list. Absolutely.
Yep.
Totally. I just saw 2 hands go up.
Okay. Does anybody want to share a little bit
3,
about
4.
what made that job really bad? So if anyone would like to share a few, I see something in the chat. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Sierra, for turning on the chat. I know there was a request to not use the chat option, but just for now, if anybody wants to share a little bit about the job that they had and what made it bad, we are ready. If not, I can share a little bit about some of the bad jobs that I've had, and they might kind of ring true for other folks. So, okay, says my boss yelled at me. Says my boss did not see themselves as a boss and did not honor their responsibility to me and others they worked with. Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, there's so often such a lack of basic respect and dignity in the way that we're treated at work. Sure, he says, I've had rough jobs, but the job wasn't bad. It was the people there. Yeah, absolutely. And the inverse can also happen. I've had jobs where the job is terrible, but I love my coworkers. And so you could definitely have that sort of mismatch. Okay, saying it wasn't the job, it was the people on it. Got it. Great. Yeah, thanks to folks for sharing. So as we kind of move through this presentation, keep in mind, like, what has this felt like in the jobs that you've had? What kind of resonates? And if you have anything that you'd like to share as we go through, please feel free to do that in whatever way feels most comfortable. Okay, so now going into this next slide that says, how is work related to health? So as we all know, we live under the system of capitalism. And so our access to capital is going to have a huge impact on every part of our lives, including our health. So work shapes our health in a lot of different ways. For one thing, work, we spend half of all of our waking hours at work. We're exposed to all kinds of things in the workplace that can have impacts on our physical health, our mental health, which we'll get into throughout the presentation. Work also structures access to resources, to skills development, and to power. Work also provides access to benefits like health insurance and sick time and paid leave, all kinds of things that are really critical for people to stay healthy or get support and like medical care as they need it. And then the last bullet point on this slide says it is also a venue for promoting healthy lifestyles. So either it could be a healthy lifestyle or an unhealthy lifestyle, depending on the structures of that workplace. So in the last slide, I was saying that work shapes health. And now in this slide, I'd like to kind of add a little bit to that and say that work is also shaped by all of these other factors that are sometimes called the social determinants of health. And so things like capitalism and the global economy, racism, sexism, ableism, classism, all kinds of the other forms of discrimination and extractive policies and politics are going to shape the workplace. And so the way that I like to think about it is that the workplace is sort of like a microcosm of whatever's happening in the larger society. So if we're seeing racism and ableism and sexism in the larger society, we can expect that all of those same features are going to be showing up in the workplace. And so now this slide is a quote from someone who I really admire. Her name is Dr. Linda Ray Murray. And so in this slide, on the left-hand side, we have a picture of Dr. Murray, and on the right-hand side, we have a quote, and I'll read it. It says, "The reason why health and safety is critical to social justice is because it's in the workplace that capital comes together to oppress people and make money off of people's labor. That is the sharpest contradiction. That's where the fight is the hardest. When we're talking about health and safety, we're really talking about power." So I really love this quote because I think it helps us kind of get into this headspace that workplaces are not equal. There is this inherent feature in capitalism where the goal is to do things at the lowest cost so that the most profit can happen. And that sort of means of being where profit is put above health and safety, above basic dignity and respect, and all kinds of other things is really can be really like terrifying and can have really terrible consequences in society, which we see. But also that means that the workplace provides a really incredible arena to fight back against really inhumane policies that can set up workers to be injured or made sick in the workplace. Okay, so there is also a very well documented link between sort of the psychological stress and our physical health, right? So this link between mental and physical health. And so this slide shows an example. On the left-hand side has a list that says job stress, including time pressure, conflicting demands, workers having low control over the tasks that they're being told to do or the way that they're being told to do things, worker management conflict, and threats of pay cuts. And then there's an arrow to the right side, and what that has been documented to lead to are things like the risk of heart disease, depression, all the way up through premature death. So in the next slide, there are other examples. So this is about income and wage theft. So wage theft is kind of an umbrella term for a bunch of different ways that employers steal money from their employees. And so it could be things like not paying workers for overtime if they're working over 40 hours a week. It could be not paying them for their paid rest time breaks, which is 10 minutes for every 4 hours. It could be making them pay, not reimbursing them for things that they pay for that are business related expenses that workers should be getting paid back for. So it's kind of an umbrella of a bunch of different ways that employers steal from workers. And unfortunately, it is an extremely common occurrence. It happens all the time. And things like wage theft and just low income in general, right? Having a minimum wage that people cannot live on, as well as having a lack of benefits like health insurance or paid sick leave, are associated with things like having low birth weight, hypertension, arthritis, diabetes, and mortality. So this is particularly particularly important when we're thinking about kind of the economics and health connection. This slide has the title of an article from The Nation, and the title is "Disabled Union Members Are Strengthening the Labor Movement." And so there are going to be a couple different quotes, as well as an example of a labor victory at the end from this article. And so the quote says that the disability community, which counts 1 in 4 in the US, which counts 1 in 4 US adults, has an especially significant stake in labor organizing. The consequences of failing to address the needs of disabled workers across industries are stark. Disabled people are twice as likely as the able-bodied to live in poverty, and they face similarly poor performance along a range of other economic indicators, right? And so we know that there's this link between your socioeconomic status and your ability to live a healthy life, and where you work impacts that in a number of different ways, as we just talked about. Okay, so now this slide I like because it sort of is talking about worker health and safety. So it has this list that says worker health and safety is, and then it's sort of like a fill in the blank, right? So worker health and safety is public health, it's racial justice, it's gender justice, it's disability justice, right? It can sort of expand to cover all of these different movements that are really advocating for people to be treated fairly, to have access to resources, to have the access to build a safe and healthy life for themselves. Oh, I see that there are some things in the chat. Okay. So I'll pause here for a moment maybe and just open it up to the room. That, like, how do folks see health and safety as a potential place to fight for disability justice? And feel free to answer in the chat or to unmute yourself.
I will take the plunge for the first unmute. For me, one thing that comes to mind when kind of thinking about worker health and safety as a means of pursuing a more accessible workplace is I think about some of the ways that workplaces I've been at were unsafe for me as a disabled person in ways that they weren't unsafe for other folks. So I think I gave an example in the chat previously of working in a place that had like doing a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of moving in very like low or unlit spaces. And for someone who is someone who has vision, that may not be as unsafe. For me, someone who's visually impaired, that was a lot less safe. And so kind of making it a safer space for me by incorporating lighting and more entrances was also a way of making the place more accessible for other folks with disabilities. So that's one that comes to mind for me. And then I see we're starting to get some folks in the chat as well.
Thank you, Sierra, for kicking us off. Excellent. Yeah, so I see in the chat, health and safety are universal issues. Everyone can find buy-in with that, but it depends on the culture and the leadership. Absolutely. Work disables a lot of people via illness and injury in a society without a safety net or structures to support disabled people. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both so much. Absolutely. I think there is, we'll kind of get into this a little bit more in the presentation. Sorry, I think there's like a tree being cut. Can you still hear me? Okay. So what's going on? Oh, okay. Attendees can't unmute themselves during the webinar. Good to know. Thank you, Brianna. Yeah, so there is work itself is so often a disabled, disables people and then does not take responsibility for that. Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, folks, for sharing. And then just to add onto what Sierra was sharing is that I really want to highlight this, that disability activists have a history of advocating for changes in the workplace that are good for everyone, right? And so the example that I always think of are the like the slanted curbs on sidewalks. Is like growing up, babysitting was like a huge job for me. I did it very often. And if you've ever pushed a stroller or, if you've ever had something with wheels, it is very difficult to get it on and off the sidewalk, of course. And this was something that disability advocates advocated for because of wheelchairs, right? To be able to get up and down from the sidewalks more easily and having ramps, right? But it makes the space more accessible for everyone, just like Sierra said, with the lighting issues and addressing those lighting issues. And so there's something really powerful about that when we're in health and safety, we're really trying to get away from focusing on individual people. And that's a big thing with blaming individual workers, rather than zooming out and seeing the workplace as a whole and trying to understand what are the structures that have made this workplace a place where people are likely to get hurt. And let's address those root issues so that it's safer for everybody, rather than kind of zooming in and blaming individual workers when they get hurt in these unsafe conditions.
Can I chime in with a few more responses that came in the chat?
Please, absolutely.
Stunning. So some things I'm seeing in the chat, fantastic answers. Also, thank you so much, Brianna. I realized that I simply misread that. So thank you. So I see folks mentioning so many working conditions can lead to disability due to chronic stress and strain over years of employment. There's no way to document anything other than episodic injuries, a fantastic point. And also for those of us who have existing chronic conditions or things that might make us more vulnerable to chronic illnesses or the development of chronic things, that can be a particular risk. A couple folks touched on poor indoor air quality, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic started. Improving it is a great example of universal design. I think that's a fantastic point. Thank you. I see another person saying something I think about is that anyone can become disabled at any time. Many workplaces take certain things for granted. And I think Yassine will touch on this a little bit later about sort of who is doing the advocacy and why that can or cannot be an issue. And why kind of, as Yassine was just talking about, who bears the burden for making workplaces safe, without realizing that those systems can become impossible for workers really quickly. That definitely speaks to my personal experience. So thank you. I think I got most or all of the folks in the chat. Really fantastic answers, everybody. Just wanted to make sure I could spotlight those.
Thank you so much, Sierra. And thank you everyone for your answers. Yeah, really, really fantastic input. Okay, so now this is they're kind of two different articles that are highlighted on the slide. And on the top right-hand side, there's an article that's called Disabled Workers and Unions, the Labor Movement Needs to Support Disabled Colleagues. It's by Katie Walsh, and it's linked in the speaker notes. And I think folks already have access to the slides, but it's there if you'd like to check it out. And then there's also a quote from that same Nation article underneath that says that it really touches on exactly what we were just talking about at this conversation in the chat. So the quote is, "By design, unions uplift all workers by way of facilitating coordinated, collaborated actions. A collective union action pushing for better ventilation at work, for example, has a much higher impact than a single disabled worker asking for this accommodation. Solidarity between disabled and non-disabled members also makes it clear to bosses that workers are invested in inclusion for everyone. And as a marginalized community, disabled people are more vulnerable to discrimination at work." So I thought that this quote really nicely kind of encapsulates the potential, right, for unions to support disabled workers and also for disabled workers to really support other folks in their workplaces by sort of coming in with a broader understanding of accessibility. And in planning for this workshop, Sierra and I were having all these great conversations. And one of the things that came up was this idea that what was this reality really, that so many workplaces are just kind of skating by being extremely inaccessible. And then when a disabled worker comes into the workplace, it becomes this really disproportionate burden on that single individual to try and make the workplace more accessible, rather than what should be happening, which is that it's the employer's responsibility to make the workplace safe and healthy for everyone. And so unions can really help sort of have that collective vision. And I think that it's a great sort of symbiotic potential relationship. And I will say that the Nation article is very optimistic about like all this great overlap. And then the Katie Walsh article is a bit more critical, although Katie Walsh seems to be like very pro-union and has been working in her union to make all these changes, but is also very aware of like the many places where unions are not there yet, and it's really like an ongoing kind of work in progress. Okay, so now getting to some numbers. So in the United States, nearly 2.8 million non-fatal work injuries and illnesses were reported in 2021. Just over 5,000 worker-related fatalities were reported, and there were an estimated 120,000 deaths due to occupational disease. So there are a couple of things that you might notice in this slide. And so the first one is that it says there were nearly 2.8 reported non-fatal injuries or illnesses. So why do you think that makes a difference, whether or not it's reported? I guess another way to ask that question might be, why do you think injuries or illnesses might not be reported to an employer? Yeah, thank you. Also in the chat, fear of retaliation. So the most vulnerable to those that are most vulnerable to retaliation may not report. Absolutely. Another person said they personally have seen workers and experience being hesitant to say things for fear of looking like the difficult one, fear of retaliation and anxiety about interacting with authority figures like doctors they don't see regularly. Absolutely. Thank you all for these responses. 100%, right? We know that it's like at the beginning, we started out by talking about power, right? There's a huge power differential between employers and workers. And so many times people have had these really bad experiences, either where they themselves have reported something and they were retaliated against, or they saw that happen to somebody else. And then it has sort of a chilling effect that now nobody else wants to speak up because they know that there will be negative consequences. They might lose their job. They might be put on a worse shift, right? They might be kind of punished in these different ways. And yeah, it can be really difficult, right? That fear of retaliation is very well founded, right? Because we know that even though it's illegal, right, we have the right to speak up about health and safety. We have the right in the workplace to act when health and safety issues are present. We have the right to be told what the things are in our workplace that can hurt us and how we're being protected from them. But we're in this political space where it's really hard for workers, right? We have a very low unionization rate in this country, although it's getting better, right? There's all this new organizing that's happening. But we know that that workplaces are not fair and equal and healthy and safe, right? They're in pretty bad shape. And so lots of people are not reporting. And so now in the next slide, that 2.8 number is crossed out. And the new estimate that I've included is, so the AFL-CIO, which is an amalgamated union. And so they release a report every year that's called Death on the Job. So this statistic is now from their 2024 report. And their estimate is that between 5.6 and 8.4 million people are injured or made sick at work, or were in 2023, right? So because the data is always a year behind. So we see that that's huge, right? Like double plus, right, of what the reported number of injuries and illnesses are. So we know this is a huge issue that impacts so many people's lives. So that's next slide says, why do workplace injuries and illnesses happen? So I'll give folks a minute to put some answers in the chat. Why do you think we are seeing these extremely high numbers of people getting hurt and sick at work? Toxic macho culture, absolutely, yeah. There can definitely be a culture, a really bad culture in workplaces that can contribute to unsafe conditions, right? I used to work on a research team that looked at the fire service, and there were so many ridiculous examples of that exact macho culture. So there would be like firefighters would like walk in through the front door to put out the fire, but then instead of exiting through the front door, even when there was a clear path, they would jump out of a window on like the second or third story. Then they might fall and break their leg. And it was like, well, why did you jump out of the third floor window when you could have taken the door, you know? And it is just, there was like, so gender had such a huge impact on the culture and the kinds of decisions that that folks were making. Yeah, definitely a focus on productivity above people, inadequate protections, definitely lack of attention to the hierarchy of controls. Oh, excellent. Yeah, we'll talk about the hierarchy of controls a little bit later. Sacrificing safety in the name of short-term cost cutting, absolutely. Quote unquote labor shortages, right? Create negative feedback loops for workers who must take on additional tasks with no change in pay or hours. Absolutely. Yeah, there's this great chart. I didn't include it in this slide deck, but it shows like the productivity of workers in the last like 30 or 40 years, and then like the actual wages of workers, and the wages are just like stagnant and the productivity is just like soaring. And that's exactly right. That's exactly what we see. Culture of treating workers as disposable. Absolutely. Neglecting protocols as a domestic employer. I've seen staff in domestic employer agencies as well as private employers underestimate safety. Yeah, underestimating safety hazards and the precautions that are needed. Absolutely. Classism, sexism, racism being done in domestic work. Definitely. Yeah, and an example of how that racism, sexism, classism is like built into our laws are that domestic workers don't have they're not covered by OSHA. They don't have OSHA rights. And there's the Domestic Worker Coalition in California has been fighting for years to get OSHA coverage and has pushed through all these bills that Gavin Newsom keeps vetoing. And that is a legacy of slavery, right? That domestic workers and agricultural workers that that work was largely performed by enslaved people. And so when OSHA was created, those industries were left out. And so you can see how the racism and sexism and classism it's literally in our laws, and who has access to even the most basic labor rights. Absolutely. And so so I guess I think you all gave really great answers to why our injuries and illnesses happening in workplaces. And the and I guess one sort of way to encapsulate those answers could be that there are hazards in the workplace that are not being addressed, right, by employers. And instead, what we see often is a culture of blaming workers. And so this slide has two pictures. On the left-hand side, it has headlines from different news outlets. This was during COVID, and the main headline says, when employers say staff infections only happen in break rooms and the community, they are blaming healthcare workers. And then the subheading says, the fact of the matter is that nurses and healthcare workers do not have the protections they need to care for COVID-19 patients safely. And on the right-hand side, there's another headline that reads, investigators believe Skanska employee killed by a dump truck was at fault. Right. And so you can see sort of this, how this headline highlights that lack of like respect and humanity and anything for workers, that literally someone died, and the way that it's being reported on is that the person who was killed at work, it's their fault that they were killed. When actually in this country, it's the employer who is legally responsible for providing a safe and healthy workplace. And so this very common tactic of blaming workers is a way to sort of blur this idea of who actually has responsibility, who's actually legally responsible for making the workplace safe, and that person or that group is the employer. It's not the worker. And so workers, definitely have a really important role to play. And as we talked about with power, right, when employers are not kind of embracing that responsibility to make the workplace safe, then it's workers who come together and fight for change. And we'll talk about a few kind of wins towards the end of this presentation. So one kind of helpful way to push back against this kind of blaming of workers that happens when there's an injury or an illness in the workplace is by asking the question, why? So like I mentioned, we're in health and safety, the whole idea is really to get to the root cause of why, like the injury or the illness happened. So some of these why questions could be, are there questions, are there conditions in the workplace that might have caused, if there was like a mistake that happened that caused that mistake to happen? Are there places are the workplaces accessible, or is an individual disabled worker the first to kind of be thinking through and trying to advocate for accessibility? If procedures aren't being followed, why aren't they being followed? Is there something wrong with the systems, policies, or conditions in the workplace that should be changed? So again, this is really like widening out that focus from the individual worker to the larger system. And then in the next slide, there's a graphic of an iceberg. And so folks are probably familiar with this concept, right? But that an iceberg, only 1/10 of the iceberg is above the water line. And so what we can see if you're looking straight on at the iceberg is actually only 1/10 of its actual size, and then 9/10 is below the water line. And so we like to use this as a way to think about workplace health and safety, that the direct cause of the injury or illness is really only like 1/10 of the story. And then everything underneath the water line is going to be the underlying causes. So that would be the procedures, the work environment, management, and how the workforce is really set up. So now what we're going to do is go through a case study. This is called Elena's story. And so I'm going to read it out on the slide. There's a picture of a woman who is pulling a very large cart that is taller than her and is full of lunch trays. And so Elena's story says, Elena delivers meals to hospital patients using a 6-foot high cart. When things are busy, the staff need to keep the carts completely loaded so they can make as few trips as possible. When full, the cart weighs several hundred pounds. Staff are told to push, not pull, their carts to put less strain on the back. When the carts are full, Elena can't see around her cart when she pushes and worries about hitting people. It's also hard to push the heavy cart over areas where carpets were installed to keep the noise down for patients. Because Elena had to twist her body to pull the cart, she suffered a lower back injury. She was reprimanded by her supervisor for not following proper procedures. Okay, so now the questions at the bottom are, what was the direct cause of this injury? We'll go one at a time with questions. So we'll just start with that one. What was the direct cause of Elena's back injury? Yeah, the design of the cart and the space that she has to push through. Yeah, so I would say that those would be kind of below the waterline in the kind of example that we were using, that those are underlying factors. But what is the thing that actually hurt Elena's back? Like the direct cause, if we go back to that iceberg slide. Yeah, ergonomically dangerous work, right, of twisting her body while pulling. Absolutely, yeah. So if we go back to this, whoops. If we go back to this iceberg example, the direct cause, that kind of 1/10 above the water line, would be that Elena was pulling the cart instead of pushing it. But then the underlying causes are all of these other things that we heard about, right? The design of the cart, that it weighs several hundred pounds, that the story mentions that workers are made to fill the carts up completely because there isn't enough time for them to go back and forth, right? Again, so that sounds like production pressure of putting profit over people. If they had hired more people, they could make more trips, right? They wouldn't have to have these super overloaded carts. Other things also, like the having like carpet in some areas for the kind of the experience of the folks that are staying at the hospital, makes it harder for the workers to push the cart over those areas. And now so in this story, we hear that her supervisor's response, right? So you have this worker, she's injured, and the supervisor's response is to reprimand her for not following the procedures. So what is wrong with that? Why is that not the reaction that we would want the supervisor to have to someone getting injured? Yeah, it silences and puts the blame on Elena, and might make other people less likely to speak up. Absolutely. Thank you, Sierra. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. It puts the blame on Elena. It makes it unlikely that other people might speak up. Does it do anything to fix the problem of the cart and the time pressure and the carpeted floor and the fact that Elena doesn't want to hit people, right? Like all of the decisions that she's making are really logical because like she is a smart person, right? She's not trying to hurt herself. She's dealing with the structures of her workplace that are set up in a way that don't make sense, right? And so by her supervisor reprimanding her, like it's blaming the victim and putting more on someone who's already injured, which is like wrong from the start, but it's also doing absolutely nothing to prevent this injury from happening again. However many colleagues that Elena has, everyone is likely doing the same thing, because if they actually followed the procedure, it would be really difficult for them to actually accomplish their job. And then I see in the chat, the supervisor didn't realize that the procedures themselves are flawed because of the other barriers. Exactly, right? And so having this ability to ask why, right? Elena wasn't following the procedure as it was told to her, right? To push instead of pull. But that's not the whole story. That's not the part that really matters. The part that we really want to focus on is, why was she pulling instead of pushing the cart? And being able to kind of push back on, again, this individual focus on Elena and sort of what she did wrong, rather than this broader focus of what's going on in the workplace that is making it likely for someone like Elena or any of her coworkers to get hurt. Okay, so now this next slide has a video clip, and it's a story about a temp worker named Dave Davis who was killed at work. It's about a 2-minute clip. If you don't want to watch it for any reason, feel free to take a break for 2 minutes and come back. The video is not graphic. It's video footage from inside a Bacardi bottle processing plant, and we'll talk you through what happened. And so I'm going to play the clip, and then after the clip, I'm going to ask all of you kind of similar questions to what we just talked through with Elena's story. So what was the direct cause of this fatality? What were some of the underlying causes or the structures in the workplace that made it likely for someone to get injured? And what could have prevented this injury from happening? Just going to share my sound.
This is the Bacardi bottling plant in Jacksonville, Florida. It's August 16th, 2012 at 4:30 p.m. What you're seeing here is a palletizer, a machine that packs and stacks cases of rum onto a pallet. The man you see here operates the palletizer. He's been cleaning the machine because bottles often break in the cases.
I'm so sorry, folks. I didn't realize the captions weren't on. Thank you, Sierra, for putting that out. I'm going to start it again.
This is the Bacardi bottling plant in Jacksonville, Florida. It's August 16th, 2012 at 4:30 p.m. What you're seeing here is a palletizer, a machine that packs and stacks cases of rum onto a pallet. The man you see here operates the palletizer. He's been cleaning the machine because bottles often break in the cases and the rum leaks on the conveyor belt, making it sticky. When this happens, the cases then crash into each other and bottles fall to the ground. This has been happening for a couple of years at Bacardi, and it hasn't been fixed. As the operator walks away, cases start coming down the line very quickly and crashing into each other. He hits the emergency stop button. Now, what's supposed to happen next is operators need to put a lock on the machine to prevent somebody from pushing the start button while someone else is inside. Under the machine, there's a lot of shattered glass as seen in these photos. There's also another emergency stop button and some bars that you can put underneath the platform to keep it from falling. But employees rarely did this for fear of slowing down production. The man in the orange vest is Dave Davis. He's a temp worker on his first day on any job in his entire life. In fact, his shift started just an hour and a half ago when he sent this photo to his fiancée. The operator points down below and tells Davis to sweep up the glass under the machine. Look at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You'll see Davis go underneath the palletizer to sweep up the glass. A few minutes later, Davis goes back upstairs to ask a question. The man in the white shirt, who's a supervisor, told police he had told Davis to sit by the side, but others heard him tell Davis to simply go get some gloves. Davis goes back downstairs underneath the machine. The supervisor and operator finish cleaning the conveyor rollers above Davis. They close the gate and turn on the machine. Cases come down the line, they're pushed into a square, and the platform goes down. Then they hear a yell. They see that Davis has been crushed by the machine. They hit the stop button. The palletizer operator is trying to manually raise the platform off Davis, but it's not working. The supervisor radios for someone to call 911. Here you'll see a worker pass down a pry bar to see if they can lift up the platform. There were some 60 cases weighing about 2,000 pounds on the platform when it went down. First responders got there within minutes, but it was already too late. The weight of the machine had killed Davis.
Okay, so I know that's a really heavy clip to watch. Does anyone want to share any reflections or feelings after hearing about Dave Davis's story? Yeah, can you explain this? Workers don't mean to blast employers. I'm not sure what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. Our lives are expendable. Items on a tally sheet. Absolutely, right? This is such a horrible example of again, right, that lack of humanity, of like basic common decency and value of life. Sierra said, I watched this a few times now as we prep for this webinar, and the line about how folks were hesitant to change things because they didn't want to slow down production always gets me. It speaks to the priorities of the plant, employers, and the culture of the plant that disempowered workers. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Sierra, for sharing that. Yeah, it's so difficult, right? It's really unacceptable for companies to get away with treating workers in this way. And like a company like this, like Bacardi, right? It's this huge global brand. They don't need, right? That like not that there's ever a justification for hurting workers, but it's just mind-boggling that the level of greed and like constant push for like more profit and more profit and more profit at any cost. This really kind of like unchecked rampant capitalism is really hard to see. Said it was devastating on many levels. No work is worth anyone's life, and it feels especially stark that he died in a rum packaging plant, so starkly prioritizing profit and commodities over human life. That is not an excuse for nurses or other people doing life-saving work to face unsafe conditions either. Absolutely. Didn't matter that they had the emergency stop procedures that existed, and it seemed like Davis and other employees hadn't been trained properly on managing emergencies or handling lost of place, dangerous situations. If people don't use the emergency protocols properly, or if other considerations aren't paid attention to around those situations, like yelling all clear before starting the machine up or something, it isn't enough. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing up those points. Yeah, absolutely. There were actually all of these different protocols in place, right, to keep people safe, right? So there was the emergency stop button. There was also the manual wooden bars that would hold up the machine to physically block it from coming down or from starting up again. Also in the video, they say that like those those were routinely not used because of production pressure. Another thing that gets me every time is that this is something that happened often, right? This was something that happened, like it wasn't like a freak accident, like, oh, this is the first time the machine got stuck. This machine was getting stuck all the time. These protocols were ignored all the time. This was just like the way that business was being done. And like, it's crazy that in so many workplaces in America, this is how it is. And so if you talk to workers and you say, like, what is most likely to hurt someone? Like, if someone were to be seriously injured or killed here, how would it happen? And people know. They'll be able to say, oh yeah, the machine gets stuck all the time. Oh yeah, like the brakes on these trucks that we drive, they don't work. There are all of these different examples where, like, we have so many warning signs and we also have the solutions, right? But there's this disconnect with action actually happening to make the workplace safer. Absolutely. Okay. So that leads us into this. Sorry, can you see, does my screen look like a full screen to you? For me, it doesn't look totally full, and it's kind of like
I
popping
can
around.
see the web bar at the top. So it does look like it's within a frame, not necessarily a full
Yeah.
screen.
Okay.
And I do see a couple more folks, typing in the chat. Thank you so much, everybody. I just want to also name, even if Yassine doesn't get to everything, we are reading them. We do really appreciate everything that y'all say. So thank you. And now it looks like a full screen again, Yassine.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you definitely for everyone who's responding in the chat. So one major takeaway that I would like for everyone to take away from this workshop today is that injuries and illnesses are predictable and preventable, right? So what happened to Day Davis did not need to happen. It was completely preventable. The predictable part, right, is the fact that this would happen with this machine all the time, that there were these procedures that were put in place specifically to stop something like this from happening, and they were not followed, right, because of that production pressure. And so as we keep going through the rest of this presentation, we're going to sort of shift into a few tools that workers can use collectively in their workplaces to advocate for change. Because we know that these injuries and illnesses do not need to happen, and employers are not holding themselves accountable. And so it's our role as workers, as union members, as advocates in workplaces to really fight to make workplaces safe for all of us. So the first step in making a workplace safer is to identify the hazards that are present in the workplace. And so the way I like to define a hazard is with three parts. So the first part would be anything that can hurt you. The second would be make you sick or harm your mental health, right? And so there's kind of three pieces. And so that's like a pretty broad picture of the different things in a workplace. And so we like to break down our hazards into different categories because some can be really obvious and they could be something that someone might see right away in a workplace. And there are others that would be more difficult or maybe even impossible to see. So we break them down into these four categories: safety hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards, and other hazards. A safety hazard would be anything that can hurt you right away. So these are often kind of the easiest to spot in a workplace. So this could be anything that can hurt you, like a slippery floor or sharp knives or working over an open flame, anything like that, a cord on the ground that somebody could trip over. We put that in the safety hazard category. The next category would be chemical hazards. So this is going to be any kind of dust, aerosol, fume, vapor that people might be exposed to at work. A really common one will be cleaning products, because folks in all kinds of industries will have to clean up their workspaces. If you're thinking about fast food, if you're thinking about working in a childcare center, any kind of janitorial work. Other common chemical hazards would be like pesticides, right? Farm workers have all kinds of issues with pesticide poisonings. The third category are going to be biological hazards. So that's going to be anything that's living. So any kind of like mold, diseases from insects or animals, right? Like a tick that could give you Lyme disease. Also things like bloodborne pathogens. COVID would be an example of a biological hazard. It's a virus. And then our last category is kind of like a catch-all for everything else that doesn't sort of fit nicely into those other ones. And so this could be things like ergonomic injuries. So this would be like repetitive motion injuries are extremely common. I've been working on this research looking at meat packing workers. And so I had the opportunity to go to these 2 different pork processing plants in different parts of the country. And we spent a week with workers at talking to them about their work, and they were wearing sensors to measure like how much strain is being put on their muscles and their bodies to see how likely it was that they would have nerve damage or carpal tunnel. And it was just mind-boggling to see how repetitive these jobs are, and just how much pain workers were in and living with, and needing to have all kinds of surgeries. And like some of the workers that I interviewed, they would say things like, at the end of the day, I can't even hold a pencil because my hand is in so much pain. I can't pick up a sock from the floor. Other people would say, when I wake up in the morning, my fingers are curled in and I can't physically open my hand. I need to use my other hand to open up my fingers because that's how much pain I'm in. And it was totally commonplace for workers to have surgeries to deal with the problems that their jobs caused, like the physical problems that their job caused, rather than slowing down the work, hiring more workers, doing job rotations, right? Just like in the Dave Davis example, we know it's completely predictable. We know how people are going to get hurt. We could totally prevent how people getting hurt, and the employers are not doing it. Okay, so now this is a little activity. So we have a graphic here of a group of workers doing custodial work in a hallway. And so we can see that someone is kind of precariously sort of falling off a ladder. There's a man who's holding a mop and he's sort of wincing and holding onto his shoulder. There's another man who is holding on to like a floor polisher, and you can see that it's vibrating as he's working. And then there's another person who is in a bathroom cleaning a toilet, and you can see that there's sort of like vapors or fumes that are coming up. So now, kind of with this picture, what sorts of hazards do you see kind of laid out here? Folks can answer in the chat, and then I can annotate on the slide. I will circle the different things that you point out. Such an anxiety-inducing image. Absolutely, I think so too. Can you tell me a little bit more about what is causing the anxiety as you're looking at this? Oh, thank you, Sierra, for helping with the annotations. That would be awesome. So I guess another question here could be, how do you think it would feel to work in this workplace? So 2 questions. How do you think it might feel to work here? And what hazards do you see? Thinking about those hazard categories we just talked about: safety hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards, and other health hazards. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There's so much going on at once and no signage. Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that is I think we'll come across in all these pictures, right? Is really like how the workplace is set up and how people are made to do their work in relation to other people makes a huge difference, right? And one of those early slides said that like the lack of power over your job has a big impact, right, on your stress level. So if like the person who's kind of assigning roles probably isn't doing the work and probably doesn't see that it doesn't make any sense to have someone on a ladder where someone's mopping because now the floor can be really slippery and the ladder could fall, right? Okay, let me scroll up in the chat here. Oh, got lots of answers. Great. Okay. Repetitive bodily stress on the vibration machine. Absolutely. Yep, would feel it in my eyes and throat from the cleaning vapors. Definitely the chemicals. Yep, from the cleaning vapors in the bathroom. The ladder is not even unfolded all the way. Yep, absolutely. If you look at the top metal brace, plus no one should be going up that high without someone spotting them. Absolutely. And this is something I don't know if folks are familiar with this idea, but on any time you're on a ladder, you want 3 points of contact, right? So that would be like your 2 feet and a hand and your hand, or like, so you, but, and this person in the picture only has 1 point of contact. So you can see that they're sort of like falling off the ladder. I feel most for the person in the bathroom, no masks, no gloves, and a short handled brush. Yeah, great point, right? Again, the design of the material, the selection of the cleaning products, right? It definitely seems like strong chemicals are being used, and there's no personal protective equipment or PPE. The toilet is being handled directly, I believe, with gloves or mask. Would help with the cleaning fumes. Right, absolutely. Thank you for bringing this up. There is nothing preventing the fumes from wafting into the workers' lungs, let alone the hallway. At least 2 workers in this image will have stress injuries. Absolutely. Yeah. So what you're saying too about the fumes is that, right, like ventilation would be critical in that room, right? That we would want to be pulling the chemical smell out rather than pushing it into the further into the workplace. The floor is being mopped, so it's actively wet while the other person is on the ladder. Absolutely. Yeah. So we can see it. And thank you again, Sierra, for noting down all these different things. Yeah, so we see there are all kinds of issues that are happening in this workplace. Okay, so now I'm going to go to our next image. Sierra, if you wouldn't mind clearing. There we go. Okay, so now we are looking at a warehouse. So we've got someone, it's a very crowded environment. Got someone bent over using a box cutter. We have another person pushing a cart that is loaded very high so they can't see over it. We have a forklift in this very crowded environment. We have someone reaching up above their head to get a box. So same, we'll do it the same way as last time. If folks can put any hazards that they see into the chat. And then Sierra, thank you very much for adding them onto our picture. Absolutely. Thank you, Sierra. So Sierra noted in the chat that if folks notice any hazards that could be particular risk for someone with a disability and or that might lead to a disabling condition, feel free to note that. Thank you, Sierra, so much. It says no hard hats and there's a forklift being used, could lead to disability or even death. Absolutely, forklifts are extremely dangerous. I have to say, like the lunch cart, the wheels on the thing were not designed for this much weight. made in the 1960s. The worker pushing the cart cannot see in front of them. Absolutely, yeah, right. So this is a similar situation to Elena, right? Where like the way the cart is designed, this doesn't make any sense. Again, we've got this kind of overall issue with the way that the work space is designed, that people are kind of like working right on top of each other. There's a lot happening in a very small space. Some other things that I want to point out. So there's a box that has fallen on the ground, and it's leaking something. And so that could be literally anything in a warehouse. There have been these really egregious examples of health and safety violations in Amazon warehouses. And there was one time when like cans of deer spray like were punctured, and then like the aerosols were just like pouring out of this box of like deer spray, and then workers were like choking on this like very high concentration of essentially poison that was like coming out and like in their eyes, and they're breathing it in. And so when you're thinking about a warehouse, right, you're dealing with all of these large, heavy boxes, right? There's all these things going on, but then also thinking through like what's in the boxes themselves, and how could the things that are boxed hurt workers, like in that Amazon example. Yes, person bending over at the waist could definitely lead to repetitive stress over time. Absolutely. Says this looks like the beginning of an ad for an insurance company that ends with some no nonsense exec going, we covered it. Yeah, absolutely, right? I think it's hilarious that all of these companies will be like, safety is our number one concern. And then if you talk to any employer, or if you even like look at workplaces, and actually like lots of workplaces will completely block people from entering. Like these Amazon warehouses, like they don't have windows, you can't hang out there. If you go into the parking lot, they'll kick you out, right? There's a lot of secrecy about what is even going on inside these places. Similar at the pork plants that we were visiting, there were like very few windows. There were guards all over the parking lot. You couldn't just wander onto campus. There was this whole sign-in process, right? Because they don't want the general public to be aware of all of these insane violations of what the conditions are like in their workplaces. Okay, and then we also have above the person with the long hair on the upper right is a box falling off a shelf. Yeah, absolutely. Or that's sticking off from an edge. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Thank you, folks. And then also like looking at this picture, for me, like the lighting feels off. And so and just like being in a oftentimes very large spaces like warehouses can be really hard to keep cool or keep warm, because they're so large, and they're the way they're set up. So like the physical conditions can be really difficult. Also like the lack of like sunlight. And something else that happens often with breaks. This is something that we saw in the pork processing plants too, that like workers had a 15-minute break twice during their shift, but they would need to walk from the floor where they were like covered in blood and guts and all these things. And then they would need to like take off their kind of like PPE and kind of like their coats and stuff. And then they would need to walk to the cafeteria if they wanted to like grab something to eat or go to the bathroom. And it would take 5 minutes of their 15-minute break to like get to the locker room, take off their PPE. And then they had 5 minutes to actually like eat something, drink something, check their phone, go to the bathroom, whatever they had to do. And then it would take them another 5 minutes to go back to the locker room, put everything back on, and then get back out onto the line. And so that's another issue, right? Where like the infrastructure is set up in a way that people aren't having access to the full 15 minutes that they're entitled to because of the infrastructure. Okay, so I think I'm going to jump ahead, and we have a couple other hazard pictures, but I am going to move us along. Okay. So that process of looking at a workplace and identifying the hazards, which again are going to be the things that can hurt you, make you sick, or harm your mental health, is a really critical process. It's what we see as the first step towards making workplaces safer, because we have to know what the dangerous things are in order to address them. So now this next section, we're going to be sort of moving into that sort of second step, which would be addressing the hazards that we find in different workplaces. And so this slide has a question written on it of a brainstorm. How can you control or sort of solve the hazard of a slippery floor? And then in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a picture of a restaurant, and there's like a puddle on the ground that people are working around. So what do folks think? What are some things you could do to control or to fix the hazard of a slippery floor? Okay. Thank you, Sarah, for the image ID on the restaurant picture. Yeah, absolutely. So one thing could be the non-slip. Whoops. I'm gonna get out of full screen mode to make a list here. Okay, so non-slip mats are those kind of rubber mats that have holes in them. That's great. What else? How could we signage? Yep, absolutely. One of the first steps would be collaborating with other staff on identifying potential high-risk areas and making sure everyone is on the same page about the dangerous spills. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Kind of like taking a collective absolutely. That way, if we miss something, other folks are in the loop and can help out. Absolutely. Yeah. Working in a collective is always going to be so much stronger, right? Because we all kind of pick up on different things and bring different strengths. And so moving together is going to be a really good way to address any kind of hazard or any kind of issue, including something like a wet floor. Yeah, some other ones that yeah, someone could be designated to mop up the spills. Absolutely. So maybe like a policy on who mops up spills. Whoops, I wrote spills. Spills. Absolutely. Some other things could be like wearing non-slip shoes. That's a kind of personal protective equipment. Okay, so I'm going to leave our list for a moment, and then we'll come back to it. Let me actually copy it onto our other slide. So now someone earlier had mentioned the hierarchy of controls, which is awesome. So the hierarchy of controls is a tool in health and safety to help us understand the different sort of solutions that might be available to solve different health and safety issues. So this on the screen is like an inverted pyramid or triangle that has 3 different levels on it. So this is sort of like a simplified version of the hierarchy. that breaks our options into three main categories: elimination, administration, and personal protective equipment. And then there's a bar on the left-hand side that has most effective listed at the top and least effective listed towards the bottom. And so what that means is that these three options that we three broad categories that we have to solve health and safety problems are not all equal. The best case scenario is going to be to eliminate the hazard altogether. And so an example of that would be like in the example that we saw of the janitorial team when someone was working on the toilet and there were all of these like vapors coming off of the chemicals. If those are toxic chemicals, then a way to remove the hazard altogether would be to swap out that chemical for something non-toxic. So now the chemical is gone, it's eliminated from the workplace, it is no longer a hazard. Another example of that could be like a machine guard. So historically, the way that meat cutters, what are they called? Meat slicers were used is that the person working would have to slide their fingers on the meat very close to an extremely sharp knife that was intended to cut through flesh and bone. And many, many workers lost fingers in that process. So now those machines are designed differently so that there's a piece of plastic that blocks your fingers. So the meat can go underneath, but the worker's hands are not getting close to the blade. So that's called a machine guard. And there are lots of different kinds of examples of machine guards. And that's another way to remove the hazard, right? That the person's fingers cannot get close enough to the blade for them to be injured because there is this barrier that was created by the machine guard. So anytime we can remove the hazard from the workplace altogether, that's going to be the best, kind of most effective solution. The next best option are going to be administrative controls. So these are going to be things like improving workplace policies and procedures. So like, for example, conducting a training, like in the Day Davis story, conducting a training to say, hey, if there is an emergency, these are the steps that you want to follow. Anytime we need to stop the machine, we have to push this emergency stop button and put these wooden bars underneath the machine so it can't turn on and crush someone, right? So that would be a policy. Another one would be to hire enough people to actually do the job. So understaffing is a huge issue across tons of different industries in this country because employers don't want to pay enough people to do the job, like as many people as would be needed to do the job kind of properly. Instead, they'll hire fewer workers than needed and then just sort of expect the workers that are there to work that much harder and sort of make up the difference. So a solution for that would be to hire enough people to do the job. And now the least effective solution, kind of the bottom of our triangle here, is going to be to wear personal protective equipment. So for example, that would be like wearing gloves or using a respirator. Now, oftentimes, personal protective equipment is the first thing that people think of when they think of health and safety at a workplace. So why do you think I'm saying it's the least effective option? Yeah, it doesn't prevent the hazard itself. Personal responsibility for larger workplace conditions, absolutely. Thank you. Because you need to have the culture and training to wear it. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, PPE can introduce a whole bunch of other issues, right? That like we saw during COVID, right? People would wear their masks under their noses, right? We know that the cloth masks were not effective. You needed N95s or KN95s. They weren't available, right? They need to fit you properly. You need to know how to wear them. They need to be available. Yeah, it often involves a single point of failure. Absolutely, right. It's better to create a workplace where it's not needed in the first place. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I feel like this really gets at a lot of those issues that we've been talking about, right? Of instead of zooming in on the and blaming an individual worker, right? We want to zoom out and sort of understand the broader context. I was doing a training in Southern California with teachers, and so it's training teachers to to train their high school students in workplace health and safety so that when they go out into the working world, they know what their rights are and what they can do. And one of the teachers during this part, when we were talking about PPE, raised her hand and was like, yeah, when I was in high school, I worked at a grocery store and my job was to collect carts from the parking lot. And one day I was wearing my high visibility vest and I was collecting carts from around the parking lot and somebody ran over my foot. And when I came inside, my supervisor, the first thing they said to me was, why didn't you have your vest zipped up? It's your fault that you got run over, that your foot got run over. Right. And so again, we can see this like total lack of responsibility, blaming workers, this complete lack of humanity that a high school student was just seriously injured and your first response is blaming them. Right. And so we have a lot of work to do in workplaces to really change the culture of blaming workers and shift it from blaming workers to focusing on the workplace as a whole and really putting that responsibility where it belongs on employers. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is go back to our list and sort of map the solutions that we all came up with onto our sort of hierarchy or our pyramid here. And so I'm going to read through each solution that we came up with. And I'd like folks to tell me where you think it would go on this hierarchy of controls. So would it be elimination, eliminating the hazard? That would be a 1. An administrative control, a policy or procedure, which would be a 2, or a PPE solution, which would be a 3. So non-slip mats, where would you put that? 1, 2, or 3? 3, PPE. Okay, Kirby says 3. What about other folks? Any other ideas?
I would also lean towards 3, but I could see it maybe falling more in the like 2 category of sort of because it's not necessarily personal specific, it kind of covers it for multiple people.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for that. Absolutely. So my thinking is along the same lines as yours, Sierra. Yeah. So personal protective equipment is going to be something that you wear on your body. And so I would say a non-slip mat would be a 2. It would be a policy or procedure because likely someone needs to know where that non-slip mat is and lay it out at the beginning of the shift or the beginning of the day or whatever. So I would count that as 2. What about signage? Putting out a sign like a wet floor sign. Would that be eliminating the hazard, an administrative control, or a PPE solution? Two, yeah. Similar reasons to the mat, right? Somebody needs to know where it is. They need to put it out. They need to know it's their job to do that. And all the while, the floor is still wet, right? So somebody could still slip on it. And sometimes when we do this activity, we'll say like, okay, so what if it's like a leaky, like the ice machine is leaking or something. If we clean it up, okay, so I guess this gets at the next one. But like if there's a policy to clean up spills, right? But then like there's a leaky faucet, then cleaning it up wouldn't sort of like solve the problem permanently. It would solve the problem kind of temporarily. So I'll go ahead and say that the policy over here would be a 2.
And Yassine, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a little bit of discussion in the chat about the non-slip mat and whether it's a 1 or a 2. Does it eliminate the, if it's always in the same spot? So just pinging that for you since there's been a little kind of conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, and thanks folks for saying this. Yeah, so there is conversation here about the non-slip mats, right? And so sometimes we count it as a one, sometimes we count it as a two. And I think where you like the hierarchy of controls, this tool is really intended for us to be thinking about like what is the most upstream solution? What is the most protective way that we can create the workplace to protect workers, right? And so sometimes non-slip mats can be like super effective, right? If you're working in a kitchen, it's always wet, they can work really well. So that could be a one. Sometimes if it's the kind of thing where like somebody needs to get it and clean it and put it out, it would be more like a two. But again, it's like the purpose of this exercise is really to just get us thinking about like how can we most effectively solve this problem. A collective approach to sort of like solving spills, where would people put that on this list? Fix the leak. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, so if there was, so in that scenario that I was kind of adding in, if there's like an ice machine, right, that keeps leaking, then the way to actually eliminate the hazard would be to fix the leak. And so that would be a number one. That would be removing the hazard altogether. And so what about something like non-slip shoes? Where do you think that would go on here? So I would say that would be a three, personal protective equipment that you can wear. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is share a couple examples. So this is the article that you saw a couple quotes from earlier in the presentation, about folks in their unions, disabled members of unions, really working um, to strengthen their union and to make workplaces safer. And so this example already came up. But so this article talks a lot about how COVID-19 was really like a wake-up call for unions and really thinking about how their members were being impacted by disability issues like paid sick leave and personal protective equipment, having workplace accommodations, needing help balancing caregiver issues. And the article talks about all of these great examples like disabled workers having, instead of having only like an in-person picket line, also having like a car, like a I forget what they called it, but kind of like a car picket line where like members came in their cars, they would block the streets, they decorated their windows so people were safely in their car and they weren't expected to be like out in the sun on foot and kind of like marching, but they could safely do that in their car. Also with having like online picketing, online ways to be part of the movement. And that's so critical. Always, right? But particularly in COVID when like the virus was spread through respiratory droplets, right? And so getting a bunch of people in person in one place is like not going to be a safe idea. Um, and then there's this other example that I wanted to share. And so this is another quote from the same article that I will read out. Disabled people are often left out of emergency planning. Wheelchair users in particular are sometimes directed to wait for help rather than being included in an evacuation plan that helps them to get out of a building quickly in a fire, earthquake, shooting, or other disaster. At San Francisco State, one significant change included installing evacuation chairs and training people in their use so that wheelchair users and other with mobility impairments could get to safety at the same time as other faculty, staff, and students. So this was a really great example of like a concrete win that disabled folks fought for and won in San Francisco to make sure that disabled workers are actively part of the planning and like the infrastructure of the workplace. to make it more accessible and safer for everyone. So I will stop there. I know we are coming up on time, but do we have a minute to open it up if anyone has any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think so. How about maybe I can do my quick little wrap up, and then
Sure.
folks who want to stay to ask questions can do so, and folks who are like, I was planning on a 2:15 end, I'm out of here, can do
Totally.
that. So if that sounds okay.
That sounds great.
Lovely. Would
Can
you
you go
mind
to the
going
next
to
slide?
my event? Yeah, stunning. Okay, so first off, you've seen incredible. I was taking notes the whole time. If you want to leave a reaction, anybody, I know I'm going to do a little heart really fast. Boink. Loved it. Thank you so much. Everyone, I'm going to say for those folks who are sort of like, I've done my lunch hour and a half, and I'm going to go ahead and head on out. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to stay to do a little Q&A with Yassine, who is just a wealth of knowledge, please feel free to do so. I think we'll maybe do 15 more minutes or so. So for those folks who want to leave, thank you so much. For those folks who got some questions that they want to discuss, start putting them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Sierra. And I'll also just put my email address in the chat. So if anybody wants to reach out, please feel free.
I just put mine in the chat as well, since I realized I did not give any contact information for myself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching this presentation of Workplace Safety for All, organized by the UC Berkeley Labor Center, facilitated by the Labor Occupational Health Program, and sponsored by the Disability Cultural Community Center. On the final slide that is on the screen right now, that information is expressed, and there is a background image that's sort of dark blue tinted of various folks protesting and chanting. In the center of the image is a femme-presenting Black person kind of yelling into a megaphone, and folks seem to be sort of smiling and excited and empowered. In the corner of the slide is the UC Berkeley Labor Center logo featuring a graphic of the gear with a molecule interwoven. And there's also a QR code that can be scanned in order to give us feedback. If you aren't able to scan the QR code, you can go to tinyurl.com/10, the numbers 10, -10, the numbers 10, eval, EVAL. Thanks so much.